Welcome to the Delight in the Limelight live show. I'm your host, Linda Ugolo. I'm a speaking confidence coach and author of the book, Delight in the Limelight. I help people overcome their fear of speaking so that they can, delight in the limelight and make speaking something that they love to do. Now, one of the places that we are often feeling like we need to be more visible at is in the workplace. And perhaps you have felt sometime that your hard work and your leadership skills were going unnoticed by the people who mattered. Or maybe you've been told in your workplace that you need to be more visible in your company. But what does that even mean? My guest today is Susan Barber, and she has been there. She's on a mission to help business leaders play bigger and increase their visibility. She's author of The Visibility Factor and host of the Visibility Factor podcast, where she's been leading a visibility movement for leaders. She's also an executive coach with 25 years of leadership experience at Kraft Heinz, and she's here to help you elevate your position in the workplace. So I want you to get ready to take notes because there's going to be a lot here, and you'll be learning along with me about how to become a more visible and successful leader at work. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I just wanted to I was saying before we went live that I've been busy reading your book and I love it. And even though I haven't worked in a corporation, I found so many of the things that you spoke about relevant to someone like myself, an entrepreneur and a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. And one of the things that really struck me is that it's not so obvious what we need to do to advance our career.
Yeah,
And this is something that you kind of had a hard lesson in yourself.
I think what was interesting to me is it's not something that I'd ever really learned about in leadership classes or management classes. And I'd heard other people say, being told that feedback, like you need to be more visible, but I'd never received it. So in my head, I'm doing great. I'm doing all the right things. And I was considered one of the top talents in our department. And to receive feedback that I wasn't being visible, first of all, I was grateful for. It was hard to hear. I probably got a little defensive in that moment, thinking, how is that possible? And I just had to sit back and take that feedback in and say, there must be something here. She wouldn't have said it if it wasn't true, or she didn't at least see my perception as not visible. So it kind of set me off on this journey to figure out what visibility meant for me, how to do it in a way that was authentic to my style. And I tapped into a lot of mentors and business mentors, and I tried to find a book, but I couldn't really find a book that really helped me with that. So kind of vowed to write my own once I left the company, and here we are.
And here we are. Yeah, so describe a little bit about what you think people get wrong or what they you said you didn't learn about visibility. What are people thinking in their heads that kind of like leads them down a path to non-advancement?
I think everybody, at least, in some generations, right, they grow up learning that working hard is important. And if you work really hard, you're going to get noticed and someone's going to pay attention and they're going to promote you. And I do think that is true up until a certain level. As you get into more of a management level where you're managing teams and especially directors, VPs levels, you have to talk about what you're doing because there's so much going on, especially in the world now. Back when I started being a manager, there was less going on, so it was different. But now, the amount of information that people are dealing with, the amount of email and text and every other device that they have to check things on doesn't leave a ton of time, to check on every little person that they have reporting to them. So I feel like it's important to I call it a movie reel, get a movie reel in front of your boss on a regular basis about what you're doing. That can be just an update on a project. That can be an update on your team and what they're doing, because there's opportunities to get visibility for yourself. But I also realized for myself, me not getting visibility for me also meant my team wasn't getting visibility either. And to me, that just crushed me to know that I was holding them back just as much as I was holding myself back. So
Yeah.
it was a pivotal moment to make a shift.
Yeah. So I can imagine that some people might have the fear or nervousness that, well, my boss is so busy. How do I even do that?
Mhm.
Where does someone make an appointment? Do you kind of catch them in the kitchen? Like,
Yeah. When you're in the office now, there's so many people working remotely that that was one of the first things I think people felt like I was able to walk down the hall, I could meet them at the coffee station, I could walk by their office, and now the remote world changes everything, in that way. So, some tips that you can take are just to set up 15-minute one-on-ones with someone, to send a status report about what it is you've done this week and things you accomplished. It can be as simple as an email, it doesn't have to be formal, it doesn't have to be crazy. But it's also taking the opportunity to speak up in meetings. And that's usually the one place where people struggle, because people in the room may be at a higher level than they are. They may be introverted. They may have some imposter syndrome going in their head and feel like they just won't ask the right question. And so, what I tell people in that situation is to try to prepare, put together some talking points that you might think will come up, or some questions that you can ask, because what happens for me is I would be in that moment and my head would just go into fight or flight and it would just spin and I couldn't come up with a question that I felt was good enough. So preparing in advance gives you the opportunity to be calmer and you can just ask your question or tag on to someone else's. If they ask a question, you can say, "Oh, that's a great point. I wanted to add, this other little piece. I wondered if you thought about that." Any way that you can just speak up, even if it's something like that, is important.
yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And I think that a lot of times if someone is introverted or they're shy or they feel like they don't have as much to add as other people, they might hang back and then they hear someone else share the idea that they had thought of,
Exactly.
you know?
Yes.
And so that's a kind of a lesson to maybe try to speak up sooner. But even I think, and you can tell me what you think of this, to be able to say, I really like that idea because of. So even if you
Mhm.
don't have something to tag onto it, you can elevate it
Right.
with how you see it fits in the context of an overall
Mhm.
picture.
Agree. Yeah, I mean, it gives a slightly different point of view to the same topic that you're talking about or to someone else's point of view, and I think it also helps elevate that person that,
Yes.
you're tagging onto their question too. So, I like to help people think about you're creating some reciprocity, between you and another person. So, you talking about other people and the projects that they're doing or the things that they're accomplishing, they will automatically want to help you too. So
Mhm.
try to start there in some ways, just talking about other people and say, I mentioned about this project you're doing, and I told my boss all about it. He was really excited to hear about it because then they'll say, oh, wow, that's amazing that Sue's talking about me to her boss. I should do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the stories you have in your book is how you were given the feedback, "Sue, you're at these meetings and you're not speaking up, so why are you even here?"
Yes.
And that was a kind of like a harsh way of them giving you feedback. I mean, there are, 10 other ways they could have said it in a kinder way,
Hmm.
but that is something to think about, and there is that harsh reality that if someone's at a meeting and they're not sharing anything, why are they there?
Hmm.
Do Is there something that you want to add to that?
Yeah, it was definitely hard to hear for sure. But when I sat back and looked at what possibilities she was seeing versus what I was seeing for myself, I realized I was sitting in the back of the room. I wasn't sitting at the table. I really wasn't participating unless, someone asked me a question. I wasn't taking the opportunity to get in front of enough people in an organization. You always have decision makers and then you have influencers. And I wasn't spending enough time getting in front of those influencers and talking about the things that me and my team were doing. So, I had to appreciate that she said it. I agree. I would have loved to have heard it differently. But, at the end of the day, it was the right thing for her to do. And it was definitely the right thing for me to explore and figure out how to do it in a way that worked for me. So, my first visible thing that I did was I started getting to the meeting before everyone else and I sat at the table. And they all walked in because this is our senior executive team. They all walked in like, why is she at the table? What's going on here? And then I made my team sit at the table too. And so I wanted to teach them that it was okay. And of course, they were nervous. And I said, you have something to present today at the meeting. You are sitting at the table. Just because they're a certain level doesn't mean they're better than you or they know more than you. They just know different things. So I needed them to see that I was going to be there to support them, but I wanted them to see it was okay. I didn't want them to wait, as long as I did to figure this out.
So when you sat there for the first time, did anyone say anything to your face? Or
Oh, no. They didn't say anything, but you could see the look on their faces when they walked in the room like, "Why is she there?"
and I wanna know, like, so how did you experience that moment for
Oh, it
yourself?
was
Like, how did you stay in your seat?
I just said, "Hi, how you doing? Good morning. How is everything going?" I just kinda went into my normal how I would be. But I knew inside they were kind of questioning, like, what's going on? And so I just continued to do it because I thought, what better way to demonstrate that I am going to show up differently now? I have heard the feedback and I'm going to show up and sit at this table every week because it was a weekly meeting. And, until someone tells me not to, or we have a conversation about it, that just kind of made other people sit in other places, which I thought was actually kind of good, It's
Well,
like
did
whoever.
yeah, I was wondering when you said you had your whole team there, did it bump some of the other
Oh,
people? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah. They had to
isn't that
sit somewhere else.
interesting? So you
Yeah,
were really shaking things up.
oh, yeah, for sure. It was definitely a disruptive moment for them, and, I think it just helped other people see that you don't have to be at that level to sit at the table.
Mhm.
And yes, it was a little, scary at first to think about what are they gonna say? Are they gonna try to make me move? I didn't know what was gonna happen, but they
So
handled it professionally.
yeah, and I mean, ultimately, they want you to step up.
Mhm.
They want
Yeah.
to see you move more into a leadership role and
Mhm.
to contribute on that level. So do you feel like that was the response ultimately, that people are okay? Well, if I don't get there early, there may be other people at the table. They're not saving my
Exactly.
seat anymore.
Right, yeah, it was interesting because when people come to a meeting on a regular basis, they kind of have their seat that they tend to sit in, right? So, it was just kind of funny to see them all kind of jockeying around the table to see where they were gonna happen. It was a little musical chairs moment, right, where who's gonna be available and who's gonna show up and where can I sit? So, it was really, really fun to kinda go through that experience and then just help my team go through it too.
That's so great. So we got a comment from Ellen. This is so common, especially for women. Yes, love the practical advice. Thank you. Thanks, Ellen, for sharing that with us. That's great. I have a question about something you said earlier, that there are different people that you want to be visible in front of.
Mhm.
You said influencers,
Decision
managers,
makers,
decision makers.
managers.
How would you? Who are? How are they different?
So think about a decision maker as usually, someone who's at the top of the house, right? Of the person who's going to make decisions on projects and all of that, or your boss is a decision maker. But influencers are those people that whisper in those decision makers' ears and say, hey, you might want to think about this project, or hey, I heard about this. And those influencers have a lot of power. And so I always tell anyone who joins a new organization, figure out who the influencers are and get in front of them on a regular basis. And this person that had given me the feedback was actually a huge influencer to our senior leader. And so I would go and present projects to her first and actually get her feedback because I knew it's almost like an alliance you build. If I get her on my side before I go in the room, then it's much easier for me to get my idea across and sell it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very, very helpful. So do you feel like you, by stepping up and becoming more visible, became an influencer yourself?
Oh, I guess I never thought of it that way. Probably. I mean, I do think that whatever I learned for myself in how to be more visible and to try things, I definitely shared with my team. And then I shared with anybody that I mentored. I was also in the leader of our women's employee resource group. And so we did programs to really help women stand out and position themselves for opportunities. So as a part of that role, I got to interact with every location at Craft. And so it was really an opportunity for people to see what's possible. And that's what I like to create for people is possibilities. and give them ideas of how to do it that's easy for them, that they don't have to do anything grand. You don't have to speak on a stage necessarily to get visibility. It's every interaction that you have is an opportunity to get in front of someone and share your value. I just don't think people always think about that first.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are like you talk about like stepping up so that your team is elevated, that your work is elevated. How do you talk about your work or your team in a way that isn't braggadocious? Because I think that a lot of people hold back
Mhm,
because, as and you talk about this in your book also, you see other people that are kind of talk, 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 and all they do is they talk about themselves and how great they are or how whatever. And you don't want to be necessarily that person, but
mhm.
you also want people to recognize the value that you're bringing. So what did you discover? And how did you find what was authentic to you in the way you spoke about the things that you were excited about?
I mean, I started out by observing others, right? And I definitely saw the people who talked all the time. I knew that was not the direction I wanted to go. But I also saw people in meetings who would just offer to help and just say, you know what, my team's working on something like that. Would you, be open to having us help you? Or, my team can take that on if you want, and we'd be happy to do it. Right. So it's about just being simple about it. You don't have to get all crazy and say everything just perfectly, but it's about offering to help. It's about sharing facts. Those are facts, right? That they could help. And so when I started to realize that, I thought, well, that's not that hard. I could do that. I can adapt, the things that I thought I had to do into this. That's not that hard. So the more I really recognized that it was just sharing information and starting to take people off pedestals, that's I think what happens to a lot of people is, this is a person who's so far above me. How could I possibly spend any time with them and talk to them? You know what? They're just people. They're human beings. You're a human being. You have a lot to offer, and so do they. But come together on some things that you have in common or share ideas. And I just think we get in our head, we let that imposter syndrome get in our head and say, you know what, you're not good enough to have that conversation with them because you're not at the right level. And if nothing else, I hope people can take away that you bring a lot to the party. Everybody brings a lot to the party. We all have different experiences and ideas and connections and ways that we can do things. So I think if you can get that out of your head and go into those conversations like that, you can share so many different things with them that they'll see your value.
Mm, mm. So you're saying that I do want to come back to the imposter syndrome a little bit
Mhm,
further down the line, but what you're saying about sharing what you do is just kind of like give them the facts. Oh, we did this
mhm.
week, or do you think that it's also important to give any context or um, share challenges that you had, or is it just the quote unquote the results? Like
I mean,
what's the best way of like giving a status update or having a conversation, and what pieces do you share?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point about context because you don't wanna just start in the middle and then they can't understand where you're coming from. So I try to teach people like a 5-step process to share information in an easy way for them to remember and the other person to receive. And the first part, to your point, is context. Like, what's the current status? Why are we talking about this? Why is this important? And then sharing 3 things. So those things could be, you know what, we looked at the following options and made this decision because of this, this, and this. Or we looked at our resources and realized we're not going to have enough. We're going to have to bring more in. We're going to need more funding. Whatever the 3 things are that you want to bring, they don't all have to be positives because your managers understand that you're going to have to share some stuff that's not always positive, and that's okay. But then at the end, it's kind of the so what? What do you want to do now? Do you need them to make a decision with you? Do you need to just inform them? Do you need to take more steps and actions based on their feedback? So it's kind of an easy way for people to get the structure in their head of how to follow that path. And it's easy for the other person to then understand it and know what to do. I think a lot of times people struggle with saying too much, kind of going all over the place, and it's hard to follow. And then the other people just don't know how to help you. So the easier you can communicate out what you need, and don't be afraid to ask for it. I think that was my issue. I wasn't good at asking for help for a really long time. But the more you can ask for help, in a clear way that they understand what it is you need, they're actually going to help you. So it's just it's a lesson that I had to learn over time, but I've tried to teach as many people that I coach that idea of how to just do a small structure to follow, and just makes it easier for everybody.
It makes me wonder if managers or bosses or directors, whatever, could help create that environment where those things happen and like have,
Mhm.
hey, if you ever want to give me, I love to get updates and here's how you do it. Like, wouldn't that make things a whole lot easier?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I want to share this one piece because I do think it's important. So, if you're a manager of someone who is struggling a little bit with imposter syndrome or they're more introverted and struggles to speak up in meetings, I would love for you to think about how to make those conversations a safe space because you cannot be visible without safe space. And so, if you know of someone who never participates, who never shares ideas, a couple ideas are that you can, at the end of the conversation, if you want everybody to contribute what they thought or share, one piece of information that you learned from this conversation or one idea. But if you can leave the introverts for last, it gives them a little bit of time to think about what they want to say so they're not put on the spot right away. And after the meeting, call them and say, I loved your idea. I'm so, so glad you shared that today. And I want you to keep doing it because you need to help build their confidence. They just aren't super strong yet to do it on their own. And the more you have belief in them, they will begin to believe in themselves. So if that's one piece of advice you could do for people on your team, it just helps everybody. And if there are people who talk a lot, try to like say, I just like one quick thought from everybody so that someone else doesn't take all the time up and go on and on and on, and the other people don't get a chance.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And it really speaks to the second part of my inner freedom framework, which is about restoring safety.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that I suggest we create safer spaces is to look for the things that are strong, that we like, that we resonate with, that we appreciate in what other people say and do. And
Hmm.
the more we get in the habit of looking for those things and actually expressing them, people start to they recognize what to do more of because they're getting this positive feedback and they realize, "Oh, yeah, this really does communicate." So, I think that that goes a long, long way, and there is a slow tide turning, I believe, from going from the quote unquote "constructive feedback" style
Hmm.
to looking at giving positive reflections to people. I think that we're long overdue to recognizing that that's not a bad way to go. People actually learn a tremendous amount for knowing what they're already doing right
Hmm. Yeah. And keep doing it and do
and
it
keep
even
doing it.
more, right?
Yeah,
Lean
yeah,
into it.
that's wonderful. So I have a couple of other 2 things I wanna just dive into. One is the imposter syndrome, but I'm still gonna wait for that. I wanna
Okay.
hear just hang on. I wanna hear a few more ideas about visibility, easy ways, or what's the next step visibility. So we have the people who are, let's say, introverts, but then there are also people who are somewhat experienced. Like, what can they do to
Mhm.
take their visibility to the next level?
Yeah, I think if you're more experienced and you have, done some of the basics of visibility that I may have shared already, one of the things is try to get external visibility for yourself. So I'll use an example when we put a big project in that had a really aggressive time frame and we were able to pull it off and got a lot of accolades from a lot of people internally, but then externally they asked us to speak at conferences. And that scared me to death, honestly. If I had known Linda back then, she could have given me a lot of tips for sure. um, but yeah, I did 3 or 4 conferences where I went and spoke about the project and what we did and what our team did to really, get funding together, get it sponsored, all those kinds of things. And so I think it's things like that that start to help people internally pay attention to you. So you could, if your company allows it, you could be on a podcast, for example. You could write a blog. You could go out and speak at conferences or be on a panel. There's a lot of ways to get external representation for yourself and help people see you in a different way. And, the more you are a senior in an organization, you have to be connected to influencers. So that has to be part of your, I would say, probably half of your time needs to be spent connecting with other people, making sure they know what you're doing, sure you know what's going to happen, because that's how you learn information in an organization. Not everything comes from the top down. There's a lot of informal networks that are happening who share information. So you kind of start to put the puzzle pieces together and be able to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm thinking, I don't know if companies do this, but even to start an internal podcast or company
Oh,
spotlight
yeah.
or, these kinds of things where get to know. I'm sure that companies already do that to various
Yeah.
degrees or in various ways, whether it's like on a blog or maybe it's by video too. But I think to
hmm
allow yourself to uh, be seen in those areas and know that it's not it's not for I mean, yes, it's for yourself, but you're there to help. You're
Right.
there to share information, and the more and that's what I want people is I want people to get to the place where they feel like this is about creating something together.
hmm
And what
Yeah.
we wanna be able to do is get over whatever it is in ourselves that keeps us back so that we can do our job and we can kind of create the kinds of things that we have,
hmm
uh, in our heads and, so we can contribute to the vision of the company or your own vision of your own company.
Right. Yeah, I mean, part of it is your own personal brand. So I just taught a workshop on this the other day. It's helping push the company's brand out there in the world, but you also have your own brand, and those are ways that people can connect with you as an individual and want to work with you, be on your team. In this world of entrepreneur world, right, might be a client. So when I was visible in craft, that was one piece, but then I had to learn how to be visible in this world of being a coach. It was very different to get on camera to do the things like I've been doing in the last 2 years. I was scared to death, honestly. I just didn't have any ability to do any of those things. So I would go live in a Facebook group by myself just so I could learn how to do it and be comfortable doing it. And again, it's the same process though. You're just sharing information with people. And if they choose to work with you and they want to work with you and they can connect and see that you're a great fit, that's awesome
Yeah.
because it just takes all the pressure off of you and off of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's look into this imposter syndrome piece
Okay.
because obviously this is one of the elements that holds people back and this idea we're not good enough or maybe I don't know enough. I mean, I
Mhm.
personally think a lot of this comes from school, but it could come from our homes also if we've been pressured to be perfect or to follow the rules.
Mhm.
Let's unpack a little bit what you see as you know, I'm just thinking, Sue, that we a couple of years ago we had this discussion about
Yes.
imposter syndrome, didn't we?
We did. We
Yes.
went live, yes,
We went
ourselves,
live and
that's
we
right.
had
Mhm.
we had this discussion. So now, these years later, like, how are you looking at the what are some of the elements that makes people kind of get in their own way with it that they're
Mhm.
struggling with?
I mean, a lot of it, to your point, is it does start when you're sometimes a child whose parents may have high expectations of you and want you to be perfect. And then you get into school and then you're trying to get the best grades. So you also have to deal with it there. And then you get into the workplace and you're being judged and rated as well. So it's just a continuation of all of that. And depending on the stories that you've been given that you may take to heart and say those are about me, or experiences that you've had that went well or didn't go well, we just kind of embody those as beliefs now that so for example, I can't draw. I can't draw a straight line, so I can't be creative. I mean, that was my story for I can't even tell you how many years because I wasn't really good at art. And now I'm in, classes where I get to paint and have a good time with it. And so it's letting all of these limiting beliefs that we have in our head and really just looking at them and saying, are they serving us or are they hurting us and holding us back? And just realize that you can change any of those thoughts at any time. I didn't know that, but that is how you see the world. So if your thoughts are positive and taking you to a good place, great. Your actions will follow. If they're like thoughts that are keeping you small and holding you back, then you're going to hold yourself back. And that was definitely my story. I didn't think I knew as much. And I've come to realize over the last few years, I think the reason was I didn't have an IT education. And so being a part of IT, where you have all of these really technical people who understand all of that stuff, and I was really good at being able to be the bridge. Like I was a bridge between the business and the systems people. And I learned a lot and became really good at using the same terminology and understanding it enough. But I think in my head, I thought, I don't know how you're really going to be successful here, which is crazy because I was in IT for 16 years. So to think about all of those things and why that was happening for me, I didn't even realize that until, a few years ago. So it's examining your thoughts and realizing that they may or may not be helping you. And if they're not helping you, change them. Just say they're a negative thought that I have. How can I change this to a positive thought? And really move forward from there because it will hold you back. And it definitely held me back.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some people, just recognizing that thought can be enough to change it. For
Hmm.
other people, it may be a little more challenging because they have some traumatic experiences, whether it's in
Hmm.
school or at home. And if that's you, if you're listening to this, I recommend you check out my book, Delight in the Limelight. It gets you through all the impacting past experiences and messages you may have heard that led you to believe it wasn't safe to speak and help you
Hmm.
through that imposter syndrome. But as I said, sometimes it is just becoming aware
Hmm.
and making a decision to change
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, Sue, this is great. I I really enjoyed this. I feel like I understand more about the structure of visibility in businesses
Hmm.
and what it like we may think, oh, what does it mean to be visible? We may not even know what that is. And I really feel like you broke this down. And of course, you break it down much further in your book. So
Hmm.
I hope that people will take a look at the visibility factor. And let me just put up on the screen your website, which is
Awesome.
Susan M. SusanMBarber.com. And people can connect with you also on LinkedIn. And anything else you want them to know?
No, I would, love anybody who is listening to Linda's podcast. We probably talked about some similar things on the Visibility Factor podcast as well. And Linda has been a guest, so you can check out her episode. But yeah, I'm really excited about just continuing to get this message out in the world. So I really thank you for letting me come talk about it here on your podcast and
Yeah.
your live show.
Thank you so much. I feel like we're on a similar mission to help people
Exactly.
feel more comfortable in their skin and
Hmm.
more empowered in their visibility and their speaking. So thanks
Yes,
so much.
100%. Thanks.
And thank you everyone who came on live.